Y'all ready to talk a lot about Kevin Stefanski? This is the post-game Q&A, and all of these questions are basically preference with, what if we fired Kevin Stefanski? Look, man, it's a conversation that we have to have. Some people are approaching this conversation with glee. Some people are approaching this conversation with anger. Some people are approaching this conversation with sadness, right? I think all the emotions that you can feel about this are valid. Like, I understand why people aren't really happy to be here, because Kevin was the only coach that's coached the Cleveland Browns since 1999 that's given me any kind of hope that he can hold it down for a long period of time. And now, we're talking about what feels like the end with Kevin, or at least the start of a very awkward period of his coaching career, So it's unfortunate, but that's what today's going to be about. We're going to have to answer a ton of questions about that. But before we get into that, I want to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. First question comes from Roger, who says, Quincy, what can be done to improve this team or this offense? Trades, Tommy Reese is the play caller, bringing in formations with the lighter personnel, changing the quarterback. Thanks for your great work with the Browns. Okay, appreciate the question. Appreciate the compliment. What can be done to improve the offense? I think there are marginal things you can do to try to get to a more livable place, right? Maybe changing the quarterback helps you get there, but it's one piece in a larger puzzle, right? I would not expect Shedeur to be the kind of quarterback that you could just throw him in there and then he's going to turn into Joe Burrow, right? The reality is those kind of quarterbacks go number one overall. Right. And not even every number one overall pick that's a quarterback does that. Right. Like, it's a very rare number one overall pick that can do what we're talking about here. So if you're the Browns, you can't just look at it like there's going to be one blanket solution. Right. You could change the quarterback. But if nothing else about the offense changes, we've already seen what Joe Flacco looked like in this offense. It was identical to how Dylan Gabriel has looked in this offense. I think Daniel Ofuise had a tweet that basically demonstrated that Dylan Gabriel's doing the exact same stuff, except for he's throwing less interceptions than Joe Flacco was in this offense, right? It tells you that there's something bigger going on than just the offense here, right? It's not like a situation last year where DTR looks one way and Deshaun Watson looks one way and then Jameis Winston looks completely different, right? This is a situation where you switch quarterbacks, it looks the same, and both these quarterbacks can be further different from each other, right? Joe Flacco's mindset, a lot different than Dylan Gabriel's mindset. Joe Flacco's size issues, a lot not even existent. Dylan Gabriel, very small, right? Joe Flacco's arm ability, the same thing as Dylan Gabriel, is a lot different. So it can't even be the contrast that you point to, right? If we were going from Kenny Pickett to Dylan Gabriel and they look identical, I wouldn't be that surprised because they're pretty similar quarterbacks. But going from Joe Flacco to Dylan Gabriel and they look identical, that's a little bit concerning, right? So the big issue with the Browns right now is that they don't feel confident being able to do anything offensively out of 11P, out of anything other than under center heavy packages. And because that's all they can do, their playbook is very limited. So I know a lot of people are jumping to, well, let's make Tommy Reese the play caller. And this is just because people want to throw some shit at the wall and see what sticks because they're that desperate at offense. And I can't blame folks for being there. But changing the play caller, I don't think will really solve anything, because right now the Browns are a team that don't have a lot of plays to pick from, right? Like, it's not the plays that they're calling that's the problem. It's the fact that we're always in these heavy personnel sets, and that's not going to change because they're convinced that that's what they have to do this season, and they can't do anything else. So whatever is making them feel that way has to be addressed, whether that means they have to trade for a wide receiver or just show more faith in some of the guys in the room. Maybe that's it. But like, look, if Shedeur gets in there, Shedor's going to be taking snaps under center just like Dylan. Shedor's going to be in there with heavy personnel and all of these condensed formations and running mesh out of tight bunch, right? And that's going to create the same problems it's creating for Dylan Gabriel, right? One of the issues that we're seeing with Dylan and that we saw with Joe Flacco is that they had an issue seeing the field. And the reason they're having issues seeing the field is because everything that the Browns offense does is condensed, right? So it's not spread out. So when everything is condensed, right? I wish I had a pen on me. I can't really demonstrate it. But when everything is condensed, right? If you're trying to hit a target in between these two Fire TV remotes, it's a lot easier to do the more space there is between these remotes because you have more area to really define what's going on quickly. But the tighter and more condensed you make that space, the harder that is. Right now, the Browns offense is ultra condensed because they want to run the ball. They want to be very heavy and very physical off the line of scrimmage. And that means that you're going to be more condensed. Now, that's fine if you're able to run the ball at a high clip because your offensive line is being physical and winning that battle. The problem is that the Browns offensive line has not won a physical battle all season. So now teams aren't really on their heels in the run game, which means the linebackers are kind of relaxing, which means they're not shooting gaps and creating space in the middle of the field, which means that they're condensing the middle of the field, which means more people here. If you look at the Browns box numbers, right, a lot of people point out, well, the Browns have a bunch of people in the box. And most people's assumption to why there's a lot of people in the box is because they feel like, the defense feels like, that the Browns aren't a threat to throw the ball deep. That's not why the Browns are dealing with a bunch of people in the box. The Browns are dealing with a bunch of people in the box because they're putting a bunch of offensive players in the box. So they're condensing the field, right? That's the biggest issue. They can't be successful when they spread the field out. Another issue this is creating is that they're not able to force teams into different packages. So they're always playing against base because teams are more worried. Base is, by the way, like the base personnel, 3 linebackers, 4 men up front, or 4-3-3-4, right? So instead of 2 linebackers or 1 linebacker. So they're playing heavier packages, so they're not able to get that mismatch that they want. They can't really force teams out of it because they're not having success spreading them out, and they don't have the confidence in their personnel to run it out there. There's not a quick and obvious solution for this offense right now because a lot of this stuff was a bet on the offensive line that has not worked out. And I pointed this out a month ago. Kevin's downfall is going to be his faith in this offensive line. And that looks like what's going on here. This is his downfall. Like, he put too much faith in this offensive line over the years. He refused to let it go, that they're not the team from 2020 anymore. And it's going to be his downfall. Because his faith in his offensive line led him down the path that they're on right now, led him down to recommending players to Andrew Berry to draft because they want to do this, and that's why they are where they are now. It's really that simple, but it's really that complicated at the same time. You know, maybe they can go out there and just try to run more formations. That's what I would throw at it. It's just like, hey, let's just spread it out. Let's just do different stuff because the stuff we're doing isn't working, but what their playbook is with all of this stuff in mind. So it's not as simple as like just costing different plays. This ain't Madden. Like, everything that they have done to prepare for the season was with this idea that they were going to be able to whip some ass on the offensive line in mind. And they just can't do it. And the issue with Kevin is he's not able to make an adjustment. And I think that's been, again, on top of his commitment to the offensive line, this has been Kevin's downfall. He's not been able to make an adjustment to not being able to whip ass on the line of scrimmage offensively. When he's not able to do that, he can't make the proper adjustments to find something livable when the offensive line is not working well. I mean, he's done it a little bit in 2023 because that offensive line was not good in 2023, but he still kind of stuck to the same principles, right? So that to me has been the biggest issue with Kevin is, what he did in 2020 was great. What he did in 2023 was great. But when you've asked him to do something different than that, because you have to, he ain't been able to do that. And that's been the issue, and that's what we've been living through the last 3 years. Maybe they want to grow through these growing pains with him, but I don't know. I'm not really for that at all. Kilo League of Legends says, hey Q, admittedly I have a lot of questions, but I decided to give you an interesting one that's away from the inevitable Shador and head coach questions. Appreciate that. Do you think they will also fire Tommy Rees? And given how involved Kevin is with the offense, I feel like they've gotten an idea of what Tommy Rees's role could be on the team. If you're starting clean, complete reboot, or do you just get rid of Kevin and keep rolling with Tommy? No, I think you got to get rid of them both. It's tough for Tommy Rees, but that's just what you got to do. Chanrod says this. If you were in a media session this week with Andrew Berry is supposed to speak in, what question would I ask him? I wouldn't get an answer. But the main question is, I have two questions. How involved has the offensive coaching staff been in the player personnel decisions, and not just like the decisions to draft specific players, but in the overall priority scheduling of certain positions? How involved was coaching in that? Because I know that the Browns are one of the teams in the NFL that have a lot of input from coaching. I want to know if the fact that they kind of like delayed committing to offensive line was because the coaching staff didn't think the offensive line was a priority, or because the scouting staff didn't think it was a priority. Something tells me it's the coaching staff that didn't think it was a priority. I want to know how involved the coaching staff is in that process. And I think the second question I would want to answer from Andrew Berry is, what is it about the personnel on this team that is forcing them to play such a condensed style of football? Why is it that they don't feel like they can do anything other than that? Is that a stylistic choice and preference from the Cleveland Browns, or is that out of necessity because there's not confidence in certain pieces in the roster? You got to figure out the answer to that. Because that's the main reason the offense just looks like dookie, because they're so predictable right now because they just have all these obvious tells on what they want to do. And I'm wondering, why are they choosing to stay in them when their problems are so evident that I could see them? You know what I mean? And if I can see them, Mike Tomlin can see them, right? That's going to be worse. So that's really the two questions I would want to ask him. DSSD says this. Hey, Q, if the Browns fire Stefanski, would you be open to promoting Schwartz to head coach and letting Tarver, the linebackers coach, who you praise constantly, become DC? I like both those coaches in their current role. I don't want to promote Jason Tarver. I don't want to promote Jim Schwartz. I think the best case scenario for the Browns is they find a coach who can add a lot to the offense and keep the current defensive staff that they have. I don't want to mess with something that's not broken. The defense is not broken right now. The defense has its issues, but the defense's issues are just exasperated by the offensive struggles. You know what I mean? The defense gives up left and right, but every defense is going to have some issues. You know what I mean? I'm willing to live with the issues that the Browns defense has. And I think that maybe going up against somebody who's a bit more advanced offensively might be better for the Browns defense as well and help them adjust to things in-house. So I would want to keep Jim Schwartz where he is because I think that's where Jim Schwartz is best. I don't think Jim Schwartz is a good head coach. I think he's an excellent defensive coordinator, though, right? So just keep Jason Tarver where he is, keep Jim Schwartz where he is, and then find somebody who can take over some of the head coach responsibilities with help from Jim Schwartz. Obviously, he would be a huge resource for a first-year head coach, and also somebody who can hopefully lead the offense into the modern NFL. I think that's really the best path forward for me. Both Sides says this. Hey, Q, thanks for the level-headed content over the years. Appreciate that. Do you still see a trade deadline wide receiver fixing anything, or should they just ride out the season with our draft capital? Hey man, I hate to be at this place where I'm willing to even give air to this recommendation, but I'm looking at the quarterbacks in this class, and I know that people are debating it right now, but me personally, I see 4 quarterbacks in this class I would not have a problem with the Browns taking in the first round. You got to do what you got to do if this keeps going a certain way. You know, if Mendoza and Ty Simpson keep looking like they're going to be top 5 picks, and your team is interested in both of those players, you're going to have to make a determination on what it is your long-term goals are. And I know that getting a quarterback is not going to solve every problem with this team, but getting that out the way, moving on to a new era at the position, could help a lot of other things. And then hopefully with some moves you make in the offseason would also aid that. So yeah, look, the priority over everything right now is the quarterback position. If you feel like there's a guy that you cannot not miss on, you got to do what you got to do to get him right. That's always been my one exception to the tanking rule. If you feel like there's an Andrew Luck, you got to do what you got to do to get Andrew Luck on your team, right? If you feel like there's a Joe Burrow, you got to do what you do. Right now, we're not at that point. None of these guys are Joe Burrow, Andrew Luck. But, I mean, we're like one solid playoff run from like a couple of these guys being really, really highly touted prospects in the same way, you know, so we'll see. We'll see. But, yeah, it's something they got to keep in mind. I don't know how much better they want to get right now, especially with like, I don't think an extra wide receiver is going to fix this offense unless like that's why they're so predictable right now, is because they don't have an extra body at wide receiver. But look at how they utilize Jerry Jeudy, and tell me that like getting another wide receiver is going to change anything. Akeem says, how well would one of the Browns rookie quarterbacks need to play in order to forego drafting the Browns in 2026? All right, so there are 2 different bars going on, right? One bar, right, will represent this with this Fire TV remote, and will represent the other bar with my Browns mug. So there are 2 separate bars going on that are going to determine whether the Browns are going to take a quarterback next year. The first bar, and the most important bar, how good are these quarterbacks? And also, what is your opportunity to take them? If the Browns have a top 3 pick and they like 3 quarterbacks, they're going to take a quarterback. It does not matter what we see from Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders. Outside of one of those guys turning into Joe Montana in year 1, it does not matter. If they have the top 3 pick and they have 3 quarterbacks that they love, they're going to take that quarterback. It does not matter, right? Now, if they don't have a top 3 pick and maybe they have a top 10 pick, now it starts to become a question. Well, how much do they like the quarterbacks coming out versus what they have on their roster, right? The further down the draft order they slide, the more possible it is that Shedeur could possibly play his way into the Browns not drafting a quarterback. It's not very likely, but it's possible, right? The higher up the draft order is, the less it matters what these guys do. And ironically enough, the more they lose games, probably the worse they're looking on the field. So that's going to be how this breaks out. If the Browns have a top 3 pick and there's 3 quarterbacks they like, or they have a chance to get one of the quarterbacks they really like, guess what they're going to do? They're going to take a quarterback. Absolutely. Andrew Berry said as much last year, right? If we love a quarterback, we're taking him. Like, he's let you know what the game plan is going to be. You know, this team's going to be aggressive to go out and solve their quarterback problem, especially after the Deshaun Watson mess. So that's really how it breaks down to me and how I think the Browns think about it. And, like, I think that's the right way to think about it, if I'm honest with you. Justified says, do you think AB will have a good draft next year like he did last year? Do you believe in this regime to be able to properly evaluate offensive talent? Here's what I know. There's been a consistent progression in the draft classes since 2023. 2021, 2022, I thought were pretty poor draft classes, but 2023, 2024, and 2025 have been really strong. So I feel pretty good about this team's ability to draft talent. They've been able to do it. You know, they've demonstrated they can do it. And it's not just been one year, you know, especially with limited resources in 2023 and 24. I thought they've done a good job. 97 says, because the players always seem to play hard and fight for Kevin instead of firing, would it be better to just take him a step back and make him like a CEO type role, like a Chip Kelly or a Ryan Day? I think if you aren't convinced that Kevin can solve the problem on offense, then Kevin has to go, because that's Kevin's whole purpose. You know, I get that like the guys play hard for him and he knows how to manage the team well, but if Kevin can't solve the problem on offense, I feel like that's a huge part of why he's here, is because we thought he was a great offensive mind. You know, if he can't do that anymore, then he's just here so we don't fire somebody and we can have some continuity. But what that continuity is really going to accomplish, if we're talking about having continuity on offense, but we're talking about what, 4 or 5 offensive coordinators in 4 or 5 years? You know, at some point you just got to get rid of Kevin at that point, right? Because like, if we keep having to fire offensive coordinators because we can't figure it out, and Kevin is still here, then you're just going to keep going through instability. It's just on one side of the ball. You can keep the stability on the defensive side of the ball and just get a new coach. Jay Redtail says, hey Q, just finish your 5 sacks post, listening to your thoughts. I'm reminded when talking about the big whiff on the Watson trade, do you think we could have possibly been the trigger to shut off Kevin's desire, hence crap play from the offense to coach this franchise? I don't know, man. Here's what I will say. It is obvious to me that Kevin Stefanski, since the end of the 2023 season, has been a completely different guy, at least when you watch his offenses, since the end of that playoff game. I don't know what can explain it. All I know is that the guy that won Coach of the Year in 2023, he's not the same guy, metaphorically speaking, that we see on Sundays right now. You know, and maybe that guy comes back one day. Hopefully, you know, for him, it can happen for him, but it's just, he's not the same guy right now. And maybe the Deshaun trade burnt him out. You know, that could happen. Like, the Deshaun trade's going to be expensive. But yeah, man, you made the comp there to Kyle Shanahan, and it might be something similar. Maybe we burnt him out with Deshaun Watson, but I don't know, man. At some point, you just got to move on, because he ain't going to figure it out here. Like, he's just not the same guy that he was in 2023. And that's a damn shame, because he was a great coach in 2023. But we got to move on if we got to move on, man. YNT says, hey, Q, if you had a guess where our pick and the Jags pick will land, what would you say putting money on? I would say the Jags pick's probably going to be top 15, and the Browns pick's probably going to be in the top 7. That's where I bet my money on. Like, I think we're definitely going to be in the top 7. We'll see. We'll see if they decide to make a strategic pivot sooner than later, because I think that's definitely on the table for them too. But thank you guys for the questions. You have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.